Well, welcome to our Building a Nuclear-Free World talk story today. My name is Jose Barzola from the Matsunaga Institute for Peace at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Our talk story today is on family resilience and the risk of repeating history with Kent and Connie Matsumoto, and it'll be moderated by myself. Thank you for joining us today to learn about the tragic impact of nuclear bombs and also further some stories of resilience, which is truly some beautiful stories that have resonated from this book. The Building a Nuclear-Free World exhibit is currently available at the Hamilton Library Bridge Gallery here at the University of Hawaii at Manoa till the end of April. It's hosted by the Matsunaga Institute, the National Nagasaki Memorial Hall for the Atomic Bomb Victims, and the Hiroshima Atomic Bomb Museum, which with the continuous threat of nuclear devastation around the world, learning about the way and working on building a nuclear-free world has never been more timely. In addition to viewing this exhibit, you can also invited to attend Senator Matsunaga's portion of the exhibit on peace and the ever-urgent need to build a nuclear-free world. And today we are joined by co-authors Kent and Connie Matsumoto, who will discuss their compelling and important historical novel of White Ashes that was inspired by the true stories of Kent's parents and releases on May 1st, 2023. Kent's mother, Reiko Odate Matsumoto, was uprooted from her home on Kauai and spent her early teenage years incarcerated in two of America's World War II Japanese American camps. She's also the University of Hawaii alumni that graduated in 1950 here. His father, Hisao Matsumoto, who went by Matt, had moved to Japan with his parents when he was a baby and survived the nuclear bombing of his city, Hiroshima. Ken graduated from the University of Virginia, the University of Michigan Law School, and has worked in law firms and private and public companies. He currently serves on the board of a publicly traded community bank and the nonprofit Head Start Washington County in Maryland. Connie is an engaged literary citizen who writes stories and poetry intended to influence positive change in our world. She graduated from Notre Dame of Maryland University, Johns Hopkins University, and is a member of the Authors Guild, Eastern Shores Writers Association, Historical Novel Society, and the Women's National Book Association, and served on the board of directors of the Maryland Writers Association. Ken and Connie live currently in Greenville, Delaware. To learn more about them, you can go to www.matsumotobooks.com, and I will add that link in the chat shortly. But to get us started, I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful speakers today and to share a little bit about, what was the inspiration of White Ashes?
Thank you, Jose, and thank you to the friendly faces that
Yes.
we see in the audience. We're so pleased to see you with us tonight. Thanks for joining. The book, the inspiration for the book, we have to rewind the tape a bit, 27 years. On my first date with Kent, we went to the Baltimore Museum of Art for a Dale Chihuly exhibit. And the precursor exhibit was the Dorothea Lange photography exhibit. If you're not familiar with Dorothea Lange, she photographed destitution and hardship years ago, the Depression, the Dust Bowl. And the US government hired her to photograph the Japanese American incarceration, more for their ability to show the country that this was a good thing. And so I was standing there looking at this picture of a little Japanese American girl with a little tag around her neck. And she's waiting for a bus to go off to camp. And Kent came up behind me and he said, "That was my mother's story." And I got shivers. And then later we went to lunch and he told me his father's story, how his father, also an American, was 16 years old, living in Japan when the United States dropped the atomic bomb on his city of Hiroshima. And so I knew then that Hisao and Reiko's stories were remarkable and that I really wanted it to be in a book. But here I was on my first date with this man, and time went on from there, and the rest is history. We'll tell you more about that.
Thank you so much. 27 years. That is That's amazing that it's coming to fruition, though. I congratulate you on that. And what made you decide to co-author White Ashes? Especially, this is probably the first time I've seen a couple of the co-authors
Yeah.
specifically.
Thanks, Jose, for asking. Some of you have heard this, perhaps. I see friends Bruce and Julie in the audience, and certainly Brenna. I want to shout out my cousin Bruce, because this is also his mother's story, my Aunt Terry, Bruce's mother. But co-authoring this novel happened pretty organically. And a couple years after we met, Connie grew to know and love my parents and got to know them a little better. And she wanted to know more about my parents' stories, but it was something that my parents really didn't talk about with each of us children. We have a brother and a sister. But sometimes it takes an outsider to see the uniqueness of a family, because for others in the audience who are part of families, at least for my parents, they were just mom and dad. They didn't talk about the war years very much. It was more about growing up, honestly, just growing up and having a great idyllic childhood. But Connie kept asking, was curious, and my parents, being polite that they are, answered, and slowly but surely started sharing more and more about their stories with Connie. That the more she got curious, the more she asked questions. We went ahead, Jose and others, we went ahead and we hired a nonfiction author who I knew from work, and he agreed to, I don't know if it was a ghostwrite the book, but he was going to write their story.
A nonfiction book.
A nonfiction book about their stories. We just wanted to get it down on paper someplace because of the Hiroshima aspect, the incarceration side coming together. And my parents would have nothing of it. They actually treated him rather abruptly when he came over to the house. And my parents pretty much ignored him and gave him very curt responses. We also knew then and know now a documentary filmmaker out in Mill Valley, California. He had done a documentary film on Emil Norman, who was an artist back in the San Francisco area back in the 40s and 50s. And we hired him, or we engaged him, put together a crew, we got a budget together, we picked a date. We informed my parents that he was coming out with his small crew of sound guy and a lighting guy. And my parents just nixed it right then and there. So all of that effort lined up, and mom and dad would have nothing of that. They soundly rejected the plan. And so then plan 3, or the third plan, was for me to write the book. And I just never had enough time. Never had enough time. It was all about me. It was all about my job being very important. And then my mother passed away. My mother passed away in 2016. And that sort of got things rolling a little more seriously. Then my father, in his later years after my mother passed, started showing signs of dementia. He was starting to struggle, which gave the impetus even more to write the story. But I just didn't have the energy or the time to write. And Connie felt it was important enough that we had to do it. So she shut down her business, an interior design business, and dove into the deep end, as we're fond of saying, and learned the craft of writing. Neither one of us are writers. We are now, but we weren't back in 2017 when all of this started. So she closed her business, dove into the deep end, and here we are 7 years later. Connie can pick it up. So it's been a long journey. It's been a long journey.
That's amazing, honestly, because just reading through what I got through so far, it reads very easily, but simultaneously it's so well detailed. Like every chapter just felt like, to the lightest, to the smallest detail, you had described it. And there's various stories that resonate, because, whether it's till this day, just without giving too much away, things that people have still to this day experience, having to having to deal with death, and like, how do you process that, finding the right words. So I commend you for finding the right words, to write almost 400 pages here. And one thing I was mentioned to you earlier was I think this is a really beautiful homage to something that wasn't mentioned earlier was your mom was a writer. She had was it 6 or 7 books herself? I looked it up. They're available on Amazon still, so anyone can order them. And so I think she would be proud.
You're kind. You're very kind. That process of my mother writing a book, she was a school teacher. She taught all throughout when I was going to school and as a young adult. She started the English as a second language program in Fairfax County, Virginia. So there are a lot of her students running around who are now adults who learned to, it was an immersion program. So my mother taught science and history and social studies in the Japanese language. And she started that in Fairfax County as a lifelong teacher. Once she retired from there, she did set out to write children's books. And we don't have them here, but they are written for children. They are illustrated for children. And she self-published, as many people can do now, and quite successfully too, meaning get the stories out there. And so thank you, Jose, for mentioning that, because my mother's children's books are out there. And at her funeral service back in 2017 or thereabouts, many of her students showed up at her service. It was quite touching.
Oh, that's that. Thank you for giving that further insight. And are you still in contact with her students?
No.
No, they're in Northern Virginia, but
Okay.
you know, every now and then a blast comes out. I attended the American school in Japan from 3rd grade through 11th grade, and my mother taught at the American school, and she taught 1st and 2nd grade. And every now and then get an email out of the past, somebody, a student who my mother taught, and she taught my classmates' younger brothers and sisters. And so every now and then I get an email from one of them.
That's beautiful. I was just thinking maybe a future book about her impact as an educator. Just some ideas.
Her books are beautifully illustrated. They really are. She worked with the most extraordinary artist, and they're sweet. They're just very sweet elementary school, early elementary school children's books and preschool.
I will have to order a few down the road.
Yeah, that's the beauty. She's self-published with Amazon, so they will be forever available, I think, until
Print on demand.
Amazon decides to
I don't think Amazon's
print
going
them
to
anymore.
anytime soon, so we should be okay. So getting back to your book a little bit. So what would you like readers to take away from reading Of White Ashes? I mean, there's a lot that I was taking away, so.
Yeah, we didn't set out for this book to, be on the national bestseller list or anything like that. We wrote this book to honor Ken's parents and the many Japanese Americans who, like them, experienced extraordinary hardship and trauma during World War II. His mom in the camps, his dad, an American in Japan. And our world is so divided right now. The culture wars are coming to blow, and there's just so much division. And so we hope that readers will consider what it might have been like to be them, to imagine being one of them, and to imagine themselves in somebody else's shoes, and how they can imagine themselves to be maybe a little bit different, a little more tolerant, a little less part of the problem. And so that's a pretty lofty goal. But we think that maybe one reader at a time, page by page, that's a possibility. And that would truly make us so very happy. We very much want for the book to be available in libraries and in schools. And so Yeah, you want to add to that?
Sure. The libraries and schools bit is important to us, and because we believe this book is meant for high school, juniors and seniors and above,
Mhm.
because some of these scenes are pretty graphically described in the novel. So it's not for middle schoolers, we don't think, and certainly not elementary school students, but for students to read about these events in world history that oftentimes are passed over. I think we Americans, and I'll speak from the American perspective, we know about the bombing of Hiroshima. We know about what is often used as internment camps. We prefer the term incarceration. We can talk about that in a second. But to have perhaps our novel used as part of a curriculum in a school so that students and teachers and educators can learn what it was like to be there through my parents' stories. To be clear, this work is a work of fiction. So my parents were extraordinary people, but at the same time, they were also very ordinary. So we did have to embellish on a few things.
No, thank you. And yeah, when I remember you informing me that it was a fiction, but based on some true facts, and I couldn't help but like as I'm reading, I'm like, did this really happen? So it and nonetheless, it's still some really just an amazing life and some amazing stories to be shared.
Well, I know, Jose, if I may interrupt you, I know the Matsunaga Institute for Peace promotes a nuclear-free world. And I've been to Hiroshima many times because I lived there, as I said. One interesting tidbit, which it just clicked the last time we were talking with people about it. My father, when we were young, took us to the Hiroshima Peace Park, Peace Memorial, and the museum itself has very graphic displays and photos and memorabilia and things like that. And it just dawned on me that my father, when he took us back at other times, never went back into the museum. And it was, he would often say, oh, I've seen that before. I've seen that before. And maybe he meant it. I've seen the exhibit before. But if you want to get really metaphysical here, maybe he meant, not only did I see it, I lived it. And he
Yes.
didn't want to live through that trauma again. But in my time, he never went back into the museum the second time around. But my point is that once you experience that, and if we can share my father's experiences in a way that people want to learn it, then maybe people will, as those students get older, as they become people either in government or in science, maybe they will reflect back on what they read, what it must have been like for someone like my father.
You're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things we constantly talk about in our classes here is conflict arises because, everyone's approaching it from a different perspective. We all have different lived experiences. And if we don't try to learn as far as like what is that lived experience, not that you need to like fully, be immersed in it, but then you might possibly comprehend a little bit or find some common ground as to why folks have gotten to the point where they're at. And yeah, I mean, I can definitely see where just from my own experience of visiting like the Pearl Harbor, visitor center here and visiting the Nagasaki and the Hiroshima Atomic Bomb Museums, yeah, there's different messages that are coming across. And I myself can say like if I had experienced that in real life, I probably would not be able to put myself through going through those museums. It's just it's too close to home. One of the things we also do here is, as much as we try to manage conflict, we want to make sure that we understand what are the red flags, I call them. There's just some things that we just, no, I'm going to step back. I really can't do that. But there's somebody else that can definitely step in and help out with that situation. And I think in general, we should all that's part of just the identity, the development process. And so I commend you for leaning into your discomfort, which is one of the things we also encourage our students to do, not as writers or not having time, making the time and, you realize like needed to be done now before it was too late. And so I commend you for that. And it's a beautiful story, really. Just even though it seems so distant, the atomic bombing and possibly the internment camp, it's, it's all within one shared earth. It's just unfortunately a history of injustices. One question I had for you both is because one of the things I've experienced is when it deals with folks who've dealt with big portions of history, it could be traumatizing. And I feel as though many times you want to go back to a quote unquote normal life. You kind of mentioned that a little bit, because you don't want it to be on like the spotlight of, yes, I don't want to just be known for that one moment in time. There's so much more that I've done throughout my life and that I can continue to do. But any words of advice for folks who want to connect with family members who may not necessarily be open to sharing those stories? Because what I've encountered is always, many times it ends up being the grandkids that, they open up to, because you want to protect your kids initially, and then time goes on and you just don't really talk about it, because we have come to an unspoken understanding that that is just something we don't talk about, basically, or ask about. But then, then speaking of the school, the classroom, as educators, then there's all these class assignments of, like, in a history class, like, please talk to your grandparent and find out about, and all of a sudden it's like, so I don't know if you have any words of wisdom or any advice for folks to be able to further learn about, their heritage.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on that one, Jose, because Hisao and Reiko were not my parents, but they were more inclined to talk to me than they were to Kent and his brother and sister. And what we've come to learn through the research process with this book is that that's not unique to the families that were affected this way. On the Hiroshima bombing side, there was a great amount of shame associated with being a survivor. Would this person be able to have children? Would this person give me the radiation that they carry? Would this person, whatever? And so tremendous shame and people being ostracized, which must have felt really, really horribly painful for them. And then on the camp side, there was also shame. Shame that they did nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong, except do what they were told to do, to be herded into these camps. But there was a great deal of shame associated with that. And in both situations, just a tremendous need to put the past behind and to leave it behind. And so, I understand now more why, when I would ask Kent questions about his parents, he would give me a cryptic answer. And then would be the same cryptic answer that his parents would give when I first started to ask them about it. But my approach with them was one that came from love and respect and curiosity, real curiosity. And I think that as they started to share things with me, it was more, I think through their eyes, to educate me on what had happened. And then Kent's mom started to share books with me. Novels started to come out. Julie Otsuka's book, When the Emperor Was Divine, Jamie Ford's book, The Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet. And she would pass these books along to me and then tell me certain things that resonated with her. And so it just happened naturally and over time, but it's certainly not something that you can force. And that's really all I have with
Got
it.
a couple things to add to that, which may be true for Bruce Ochio in the audience there, because he's my cousin, and his mother and my mother obviously were sisters. But my mother's surviving sister is Aunt Wanda, and she is whatever she is now, 92-ish, maybe 90 or so. And she told us some of her stories, her experiences, what it was like to leave Hawaii or Kauai and go to Jerome, Arkansas for an indefinite period and then be shipped off to Tule Lake. And so she shared some of those stories with us over a weekend as we were doing our broadly termed research. Connie wrote up all the notes from the conversation over the long weekend that we had with Aunt Wanda. And then you're going to have to pick up here because I don't know exactly what happened, but
Yeah.
Connie will tell, and then I have the other point to make.
So I typed up about 10 pages of notes, and her children, Kent's cousins, not Bruce, the other cousins, they were very interested in what mom had to say. And so while I'm in Cincinnati, they're asking, what did mom say? What did mom say? And I was telling them a little bit about it. And they knew that I was taking notes and they wanted to see the notes. And I understand why. And so typed up the notes, mailed them to Aunt Wanda in Cincinnati, never heard from her. And I waited a month or so and then called her and said, Aunt Wanda, did you receive the notes? And she said, oh, I did. Thank you very much. And I said, well, you know, your kids want to read this. May I share it with them? Because I had included a note asking for her permission. And she said, no, they can wait for the book.
So that it's that generation that to your point, Jose, didn't want to burden, didn't want to share. The second point that I wanted to make in addition to Aunt Wanda is the Japanese American Memorial Pilgrimages nonprofit organization, goes by the acronym JAMP, J-A-M-P. We are donating a percentage of our proceeds to JAMP. And JAMP, it's not self-explanatory, but JAMP organizes pilgrimages to the 13 or so incarceration camps around the United States. In fact, quick digression, Connie and I are launching our book in Jerome, Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas, on May 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And Jerome is about 2 hours away from Little Rock, but we're going to make a pilgrimage to Jerome. There's nothing there. I've been there before.
Smokestack.
A smokestack is there. But we're going there. We're going to launch the book there in Little Rock, Arkansas. But these pilgrimages are a way for the current generation, the younger generation, to go and see where their parents or grandparents were incarcerated. We went in 2000, so 23 years ago, with my mother to Tule Lake. Tule Lake is in Northern California, in the middle of nowhere. And we were able to go on a pilgrimage where there were more people. My mother, of course, was in her 70s or so. So she was able to do that. But it's just natural, I'm going to just say it. Everybody of that generation is dying. So it is important to get those stories down, whether it's on paper. It's important to hear those stories. And last point, part of the program in Jerome, Arkansas, that pilgrimage will be for intergenerational discussion. So the Sansei, my generation, the Issei and the Nisei, and then the Yonsei even, who will be our children, to speak with each other and among each other and learn from each other. So that's another way to go and learn a bit more.
Thank you so much. And how, that's amazing that you're doing the launch, and if anything, it'll draw people. I don't know if people visit there that often or not. I've actually never been to the place, but
it's pretty remote. It was designed that way.
Yes. It's not like it's a mall or there's a mall nearby.
Right.
But no, thank you. I mean, I think you all have done a beautiful job of, not like I mentioned earlier, paying homage to the stories, to the craft, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness that you continue to do, even as you're, releasing this. You're not going on a TV tour or any one of those. And so I just realized your cousins are going to have the same question with the book. What's fiction, what's not. They never got to see the original notes.
Well,
We can have that conversation.
well, you touch upon I'm just going to go take your question for what it's worth, Jose, and go into the craft of writing, because my mother had 3 sisters. My father has a brother. And during the writing process, once we started working with, is it the developmental editors? Developmental editors. So even before a publisher, before a publicist, again, I'm in the craft of writing now. They said it's going to be really hard to keep track of 4 sisters. So you're going to have to get rid of 2 of them. And so I'm being a little blunt, but I think that's exactly how they worded it.
Yeah, unfortunately, they call it, sometimes you have to kill off your darlings. And that was a very hard decision to make. And so we did it. There's now only 2 sisters. And for the character of Ruby, who is the main character in the book, her personality is truly a blend of Kent's mom, Reiko, and his Aunt Wanda. And Aunt Wanda was also a very spirited person. And then the older sister, Mari, I really can't speak to Kent's Aunt Terako and Michiko. I knew Michiko, but not Terako. But she's the older sister. She's the nurturing person in the family. She's the wise one in the family. And yeah, so 2 sisters.
2 sisters instead of 4. The male, my father has a brother, a younger brother, which he also had in real life. And so we mirrored some of those events as well off of those characters. But I'll also just say, Jose, that we also had a lot of really moving points in our research. And I know we've got some researchers in the audience as well, but you never know what you're going to come across. The National Archives in Washington, D.C. is just a great source of original source material. And I'll give for example. So I've got a couple of examples, but one is my father's arrest warrant. So when he was grandfather, when the grandfather on my mother's side was a Buddhist priest, and Pearl Harbor was bombed on December, whenever it was, 1941. And the very next day, the FBI came and arrested him. And that arrest warrant is in the National Archives. And to actually hold a piece of paper of the FBI arresting the grandfather is really quite a remarkable feeling right there. We also learned that my grandmother, who was my mother's stepmother, had a very severe medical condition. And so we were able to read through, I don't know if you can get away with it these days because of HIPAA laws, but we were able to read through all her medical history when she was in camp. And it was almost very invasive. It was very uncomfortable.
But very enlightening. She was a very difficult woman. And it was hard for me to understand how someone could really be that harsh. But she was harsh to her stepdaughters. So this is the stepmother. And reading her file, I got to see, how much pain there must have been inside of her. And how the trauma of leaving her country of Japan to come to the United States, not even knowing this man, to raise his daughters as his new wife. And then very shortly thereafter, war breaks out and he's arrested and she's in charge of these 4 daughters. Just very insightful.
Very remarkable.
So you have to read the book to learn more.
Thank you so much for sharing those tidbits. And it's kind of outrageous that you have to let go of the family just to be able to write a story. I like to think people could follow the different, names but
Well, it's not so much following the names, Jose. It's more how are they moving the story forward?
oh right. Okay.
And there was so much to cover because at the core of this book is a love story.
Yes.
And so, I mean, it could have been this 1,000-page family saga, but I don't think either one of us had the energy or the
Nobody wanna read it.
inclination to do that. And but we do think that it really captures what we wanted the book to capture.
And it's actually a love story on two levels. One is between my parents, and the other is each of their love for America. And the irony there is, here are my parents. I'll speak for my father first, then my mother. My father's love for America. Once he learned that he was an American, he came back to America, learned English. Right after he graduated from high school, he joined the U.S. Air Force. So here he is joining the U.S. military that dropped the bomb on his city. And then after that, he went and got his education at the University of California, Berkeley on the GI Bill, and then met my mother in Berkeley. My mother, for her part, after the war, a lot of the Japanese Americans, I'm not sure if many people realize this, they were in camps for what turned out to be 4 years, and they had nothing to go back to. It's not as if they all had someone was keeping their house. In fact, if anything, their house was taken from them. Their land was taken from them. Their bank accounts were gone. So the only place that the Americans thought the Japanese Americans would have to go back to was Japan. And my mother was an American. So what was she going to go back to? And so she wanted to stay here. She didn't want to go back to Japan. And so that was her love of country as well.
But she was nearly forced to go back to Japan. And that was something else that was revealed in the documents at the National Archives that I don't think you had any idea about.
No idea.
That. So her stepmother very much wanted to go back to Japan and had filed papers for repatriation, the repatriation application. And Ken's mom, was forced to sign a similar application for expatriation. And she was a kid. It didn't turn out that way, but it sure could have.
And thank you for spotlighting that complicated relationship with the nation that is supposed to be all inclusive, but what better way to show your patriotism than to join up and fight for the country. And
Yep.
that is really the story of a lot of Nisei, and that's the Nisei veteran story during World War II. We have a question from the audience. Can you speak about why you chose to novelize the story? There seems to be so much just in the reality of their tales, but maybe just the journalist thinking. Do you think it would make it easier to fill in any gaps in the real story or the research, the answers you couldn't get before your parents passed?
Well, like Ken said, we did originally seek to have a nonfiction author the book, and that didn't work out. The notion of us doing it was just not going to work out with Ken's family dynamics. We love his brother and sister tremendously and value those relationships tremendously. And if we had said anything, even a little bit negative about mom or dad, it would not have gone well. But, even with narrative nonfiction books, people have flaws. People are humans. And so you have to bring those things to light. And so that's why we decided to make it a fiction book.
It's also more interesting that way. We could tap into what little creative juice we have in us and create scenes. And we think some of the scenes are, as I said earlier, figments of our imagination, but we had fun with it.
Yeah. And hopefully it will be something that people pick up to read for enjoyment and for their book clubs and things, and in schools. That it's not a textbook, it's not a dry nonfiction book. Not that all nonfiction books are dry, they certainly are not. But we wanted this one to have life and to not only tell about what happened in history. That's what nonfiction books do. They tell what happened in history. We wanted this book to tell, as best as we could imagine it to be, what it felt like to experience the things that they experienced.
Thank you. It just occurred to me as I'm hearing you both, there's 2 additional love stories that haven't been talked about. So there's actually 4. One is the love story of you, like for this story itself and respecting the stories and intentionally making it fiction for that, for the love of family. And fourth or lastly, I like to think that, you know, your relationship probably got a little bit closer as you went around the country trying to fill in the blanks. And what a wonderful journey, you know, to break up the daily routine of those folks' lives, you know. So
Kind of you to say, Jose. It was a lot of Connie and I did a lot of the legwork pre-COVID. None of us knew that COVID was going to happen. And then when the lockdown did happen, 3 years ago now, I think we were pretty much deep in writing at that point. So in a perverse sort of way, the good for us that came out of the lockdown was just sitting down and writing, and writing and rewriting and editing. So it worked out well that way. We were actually also recalling just before COVID, each of us had major surgeries, and so we were both within 3 months or so of each other, homebound for that reason. So a lot of writing from the bed.
well, I gotta say, you definitely made your time during this pandemic very productive. So thank you
Sure.
for putting together this book.
Wasn't much else to do.
I don't know if anyone else has any questions in the audience. I do have one almost final question today. Any words of wisdom for folks who want to learn further about the story of their families? You kind of alluded a little bit further, but just wondering if there's anything else you'd like to add on to that.
Yeah, I think ask.
Yeah.
Just ask and maybe do some of your own research. There's a lot that you can learn on your own about, you know, where your family comes from, what they experienced, and maybe approach it, you know, that way. Like, hey, I learned this fascinating thing that happened at a time that you were alive that must have, you know, how does that affect you?
Yeah.
And maybe somebody will talk about it, maybe not.
I don't know if my mother knew that this book, I know she didn't think that this book was going to happen, but she put together a scrapbook for each of us 3 kids. And it was, a lot of it was repetitive, but at the same time, it was a scrapbook. And she just typed notes and she spoke about my father's story. So we've used that as it wasn't the foundation of our book, but it certainly went a long way. In my mother's own words, went into the story. So we were able to draw on that as well. So for those in the audience, and I think I know who some of you are, you have grandchildren, maybe to commit some of that stuff to paper. It doesn't have to see the light of day other than the family.
I just thought of something. There are books out there. I can't think of what one is called right now, but it's a fill in the blank kind of a book.
Oh, yeah.
And there's actually a publisher that gives you the questions for you to ask your loved one. And then you give the answers and you can provide photographs and whatever you want. And then this company assembles it into a hardcover book. And they're really nice. But I can't remember who they are.
I tried looking it up and I have no idea, but that sounds amazing. And one of the things that comes to mind is just how in this digital age, you know, we take photos. I don't know how many people are still printing out those photos nowadays. They just end up in the cloud somewhere or on the drive. But you just reminded me of like, yeah, photo albums, like the beauty of that and scrapbooking, such a great craft. So definitely a heat to bring it back or continue it. Because I mean, how else are we supposed to, reflect upon those moments? So
Well, Jose, we've really enjoyed it. It's nice to see so many friendly faces, and Lisa, I see you out there as well. A new old friend emerging from this book. We've really enjoyed getting to meet other people and reconnecting with people.
Excuse me, Brenna Bree just put in the chat the name of the company. It's Storyworth.
Okay. For anybody who wants to do it. Brenna is also a published author.
oh, thank you so much. Oh, I love this. Okay, something for me to explore.
And Jose, I know you said that this A is being recorded, and you also get viewers. Viewers are welcome who view this video afterwards are welcome to contact us, of course.
Thank you. Yeah, and we'll add it to our YouTube channel. And what I'll do is I'll be sure to link up your website so folks can go there to get further information. But I just have to say thank you so much, Connie and Kent, for allowing us to learn, further about your book and the story of your family, a couple generations. Truly appreciate you opening up about, because many times culturally family is like close. So I commend you on the bravery and just the time and everything in general, just to like put it out there. I mean, and yeah, you're right. Got to protect the family most of all. So really enjoyed today's dialogue. Thank you for kindness and leadership in this field. And thank you to everyone who joined us today.